Hello friends, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. I'm not sure if I will release this video before or after the video where I reveal the bookshelves that I'm sitting in front of, so if I haven't released that video yet or you haven't watched it, just close your eyes, and then later you'll get the bookshelves revealed to you. Aside from my bookshelf reveal, this is my first time filming in this apartment, so it might be a little bit more echoey than usual. It feels a little bit like that, but today I have a little bit different of a subject to discuss, and that's because the item of today's discussion is AI. It's become a very big discussion point in the bookish community and just the online sphere for obvious reasons. AI is becoming a bigger and bigger part of our society, and it's starting to be relevant to different sides of society and different fields of work. And the application of AI and the effects of AI have hit each industry a little bit differently. Since I am primarily in the book industry and the creative industry more generally, that's the side of the AI discussion that I'm typically more involved in, and it's one that I have a lot of thoughts about. But before we dive into my thoughts on AI in the bookish sphere specifically and the creative field more generally, I want to give sort of a broad bird's eye overview on some of the issues that people typically have with AI. We'll be discussing environmental and ethical issues, and basically just in case you've been living under a rock, I want to give a little bit of background to why this conversation is important. First off, let's start really theoretical with AI. What we as humans have always been trying to do with our technology, with our tools, has been to make our own lives better and the lives of the people around us. We've been using tools forever, basically, for millennia, and as time goes on, we've just been further adapting them to our needs. The idea with AI is to automate tasks that we as humans either can't do ourselves or takes a lot of effort for us. One of the really cool applications of AI as a tool so far is that we've been able to use it to detect diseases long before we could ever detect them. Having AI do things like detecting diseases and other mind-numbing tasks that humans typically would have to do or wouldn't even be able to do. When we're able to get AI to do those sorts of tasks for us, it makes a very tangible difference in the quality of us as humans' lives. Obviously, we hope that as we are able to automate some of the tasks that we as humans have to do, it will free up time for us to be able to pursue passion projects, things that we like, creative fields, things like painting and writing a book and reading and making a movie. What myself and many other people, and I presume most people, don't want AI to do is take over all of the creative fields like making art and books and movies and leaving all of the menial tasks to us. I really don't think that I'm alone in feeling that if AI took over the creative fields and not the menial tasks, it would have a net negative on humanity. Another aspect of AI that is frequently criticized is where it gets its information from. I hope it's not news to you that AI is often wrong with the answers that it provides, because it just gets answers from open source material, from the internet, from us, who are also frequently wrong about things. Another side to this same coin is generative AI, the AI that's making art, the AI that's, producing a recipe for you, or a paragraph about going to the moon, whatever it is you're having AI write for you. That generative AI has to be trained on something. It's pretty well known in the art industry that generative AI was trained on the works of artists who've put their works out on the internet, and AI basically looks over the piece of art, chops it up, and then puts those pieces back together and says it's its own piece, which many have argued is a form of plagiarism. AI can be trained on copyrighted material and then regurgitate something very like unto it, with pieces and sometimes even the watermarks of pieces of art regurgitated back onto another piece of art. This doesn't just happen with art though. This happens with the written word, this happens with art, and this happens with different video footage that AI creates. That's one of the ethical issues that people have with AI. But there's a third, and in my opinion, more important issue that many of us have with AI, and that is the environmental impacts of AI. I'm going to just spit some statistics at you here, and then I'll bring them all together. And once again, this may be something that you already know, but just in case it isn't, let's talk about the very real, tangible impact that AI is having negatively on our environment. According to the UN Environmental Program, in order to power AI, these data centers need an excessive amount of energy that in most places is still fossil fuels, which, as you may know, are very bad for the environment. A request made through ChatGPT takes 10 times the energy that a Google search would require. The Harvard Business Review found that the global AI energy demand is going to increase by 10 times the current level and exceed the energy requirements of a small country like Belgium by next year, 2026. According to MIT News, what's different about generative AI is the power density it requires. Fundamentally, it's still just computing, but a generative AI training cluster can require 7 to 8 times more energy than a typical computing workload. Scientists have estimated that the energy requirements of data centers in North America have increased from 2,600 megawatts in 2022 to 53 megawatts in 2023, just 1 year later, due mostly to generative AI. Beyond just energy demands, a great deal of water is required to cool these data centers. So much water is required in this cooling that it can strain local ecosystems and deplete municipal water supplies. The chilled water that AI uses is circulated through a data center and essentially pulls the heat out of the data center to keep it cool while running. Back to the UN Environmental Program, they quote a study that found the training of ChatGPT, OpenAI's now outdated model from 2020, evaporated 700,000 liters of water. Google's data centers in 2023, after the release of their AI, withdrew 23 billion liters of water for on-site cooling. The global AI demand in 2027 is projected to account for 4.2 to 6.8 trillion liters of water, which is more than the total annual water withdrawal of Denmark 4 to 6 times over, or more than half of the United Kingdom. Now, let's take those liters of water from some amorphous idea that's really hard for me to conceptualize and is probably the same to you, and let's conceptualize that. So you know that the average person is recommended to drink around 8 glasses of water a day, okay? So imagine 8 glasses of water. That's 4 liters of water. A 10-minute shower uses about 76 liters of water. But one that I feel like we can really conceptualize is a bathtub full of water, okay? Picture a bathtub full of water. That's about 136 liters, okay? Okay, so 136 liters of water is one bathtub. Now let's go back and revisit AI's water usage. Think about Google's data centers. Remember in 2023, they withdrew 29 billion liters of water. How many bathtubs do you think that is? If you guessed that it was 213,235,294 bathtubs full, you'd be right. That's so much water. ChatGPT-3, that model that was trained back in 2020, how much did its training require in water to cool it? How many bathtubs? 5,147 bathtubs of water to train one single generative AI program. Let's go back to the projected global AI water usage for 2027, 2 years from now. Remember that projected 4.2 to 6.6 trillion liters of water? That's equal to 30 to 47 million people's annual water consumption. That's about the population of Canada. So AI is requiring the same water consumption as an entire country the size of Canada. That's a lot of water. Now, you might be thinking, but Emily, making things with AI is fun. I like asking AI to write a speech for me or to draw a picture of somebody looking like a Studio Ghibli character. You're not wrong. It is kind of fun. It's like, remember when you were a kid and you wandered into a piano store, maybe in the mall, and you walked up to a piano and you found one that was a player piano and it could play music all on its own. It would even press the keys down and you're watching it and it's playing. It's so interesting to watch that sort of thing, right? Like super interesting. I could sit and watch a player piano for at least 30 minutes. But after about 30 minutes, you've kind of seen it, right? You've kind of already experienced the player piano. The player piano is cool, legitimately. But if you go into a theater and you've spent, I don't know, $60 to go see this concert, and when you get there, you discover that no one's actually playing. They just wheeled the player piano from the mall out onto the stage. How would you feel about that? It would kind of feel like a waste of money. Once you get to that point, the novelty of the player piano has kind of just worn off. And if you wanted to listen to music, you might just make a playlist. Right? That's pretty much AI to me. feel it's appropriate to start very broad on this issue and just discuss the implications of AI in the creative fields in general before we hone in closer on AI in books. Just like my player piano example, when you've watched a player piano play something several times through, you've kind of seen it all. It doesn't really change even if you change the song. After you've made enough images with AI, you kind of already know what the AI is going to put out, right? Once you've asked AI to make you as a Pixar character and then a Studio Ghibli character, you can imagine exactly what you'll look like as a Barbie character. But that's not the only issue with AI in art. Another aspect about art that I know I'm not alone in thinking is that a big part of art is in the creation, the soul of it. When you walk through a museum and you see a piece of an artist's heart on the page, you can tell something about their personality and how they painted. You can feel the sorrow in Van Gogh's eyes as you look at his self-portrait. You can feel the artist's anger or passion or devastation as you look at their works. And that's something that's majorly missing in AI art for me. There really isn't a soul to the painting. Sure, something about it may be technically good, but it's missing that human aspect to it. Now, those of you who've been around my channel for a minute, you may already know this about me, but I'm a big fan of fan art. When I put art on the screen as I talk about a book, I try to find a piece of fan art for that character, because there's something so special in reading a book and then finding that someone else out there on the internet cared so much about that book that they tried to conceptualize the person that you're reading about in an image. And then showing that image feels like sharing that book with someone. Unfortunately, lately, as I've been searching the internet for fan art for books that I want to discuss, I have found that it is becoming increasingly more difficult to find actual fan art. I can find a plethora of fan-created, is a generous way to put it, AI images of Xaden from Fourth Wing, but it's getting increasingly difficult to find a piece of art that was actually made by a human as they were thinking about Xaden from the book. And something that's so frustrating about this is, look at all these examples of pictures of AI creations of Xaden. They all look kind of the same. They look like someone, but at the same time, not exactly anyone. But then if you look on this side, I have some fan art images of Xaden, and they look a little bit different, each of them, and they look like they could actually be someone. They are multiple different people's imaginations of this character and how they put them on screen. Whereas all of these is just asking a computer to imagine someone. To me, that very much takes the soul, takes the human out of art. I'm not saying that these images created by AI are inherently without value. Like, obviously they serve a purpose. They give you something to look at while you're reading the book and conceptualize this character. But having a piece of art that depicts someone and having a piece of fan art are two completely different things. And I will die on this hill. Fan art is meant to be something created by a fan from their own heart and their own creation, their own creative powers to pay homage to a character. Having AI do that for you is not the same thing, I'm afraid. But whether or not you care whether your art or fan art were created by a machine, there's still another issue when it comes to AI's place in art that is super important to discuss. With the increase of AI in the art field, there are two major ways that AI is taking the livelihood from artists. The first is in the business industry, as companies look for art for their logo and for their color scheme for their background, or for an ad that they're making. That has always been something that they go to someone in the creative field for. They go to a graphic designer, they go to an artist for. And increasingly, that's been going to AI. I have a friend who was working in that side of the business industry for a while, and even though initially her job was not replaced with AI, where her bosses had previously come to her with ideas, workshopped something together, looked at her sketches, picked out which ones they liked best, and then ultimately commissioned her to create something. As generative AI hit the scene, it slowly morphed into something where they would type into a generative AI art program an idea, and then a couple more ideas, and they would look roughly the same because AI tends to produce something kind of the same every time. And then they would bring those images to her and say, do something with this in the form of a pitch. And where before artists were able to sort of work with the people in the business industry together to create an image that reflected what the business was looking for and also what the artist could create, in her particular experience, and I don't think it's unique to her, her higher ups tended to get their hearts set on an AI image and an idea that AI had created, and basically nothing but touching up that piece of art would satisfy their vision. Again, this is an anecdotal experience, but I'm sure it is far from the only time that has happened, and I'm sure it is far from the only time it will happen in the future. The other way that AI is directly impacting artists' abilities to get jobs is even more overt than that. I have a friend who works for a publishing company, and her job is to find artists. She's always looking on Instagram and portfolios and all over the internet for artists to illustrate pieces for books. She's constantly on the lookout for new people who've created beautiful art to commission them to make something for a book. But basically since 2022, with the boom of generative AI, it's become increasingly difficult for her to be able to verify whether someone actually created a piece of art themselves or whether they asked ChatGPT to do it for them or other kinds of image generation AIs. As AI continues to improve, it's become increasingly difficult to verify whether that is actually someone's piece of art. And in many cases, it's gotten to the point that they can only verify that someone did that art themselves if they had an online presence as an artist prior to 2022. Now, as you can imagine, there are people who are not adults in 2022. There are people who hadn't gotten into art yet in 2022. That was 3 years ago. A lot of people don't start their internet presence in their first few years of doing art, or they just got into it. And with this boom of generative AI art and the difficulty that that creates for verifying whether someone is creating the art themselves, especially for publishers that are trying really hard to use real artists and not AI, if we aren't able to find a way to verify whether someone created the art or whether AI did, then it might get to the point where people can only get jobs as artists if they were already working by 2022. So whether it comes down to the graphic design industry or artists that simply didn't have an online presence a couple of years ago, there are quite a few ways that AI is directly impacting the livelihood and the ability of artists to create art. But that's not the only place that AI is having an effect in the creative industries. Unfortunately, here we are. AI is starting to run rampant in the publishing industry as well. As far as I know, it's not yet in the traditionally published industry. Let's hope, at least. I have no info to prove one way or another, other than that the big publishers are pretty AI negative. I'm really hoping that that remains the case, because there's a big part of the publishing industry that a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but that's ghostwriting. Basically, when a big celebrity like Prince Harry writes a book, they write it with the help of someone who really has the skill of writing, and they take someone's lived experience and someone else's writing skills and marry them together to create a book that's really digestible for the public. Ghostwriting is a very real and very important job in the publishing industry. It's one of those fields that I feel is in danger of AI encroachment, and I really hope doesn't get taken over by AI. But ghostwriting aside, let's discuss how I first started thinking about AI in the publishing industry. Picture this: it was early September in 2024, and NanoWrimo, National Novel Writing Month, posted what is, in my opinion, a very, very wrong opinion. Oddly enough, this is when I first learned that NanoWrimo was an organization in its own right, and not just an acronym someone made up for a month when a whole bunch of authors try to write a first draft all in 1 month. The statement was why they condone, or at least don't reject, the use of AI in novel writing, and I'll read you their 3 main points. Their first point is classism, and it reads as follows. Not all writers have the financial ability to hire humans to help at certain phases of their writing. For some writers, the decision to use AI is practical, not an ideological one. The financial ability to engage a human for feedback and review assumes a level of privilege that not all community members possess. Okay, this is my field. I'm an editor, so I have a lot to say about this. This statement makes me so mad because yes, people who have less disposable income or who are living paycheck to paycheck, like most of us are in this economy, don't have as much time or money for hobbies, which is unfortunately what writing starts and ends at for a lot of authors. As an editor, I'm well aware that there are some parts of the writing process and the process of creating a good book that cost a good deal of money. But that's because that refining process takes a lot of time and work and know-how. As much as you may think AI can edit your books, it kind of can't. I don't know if you've tried using Grammarly before. This is just an example that came to mind, but back when it was a free add-on to Gmail, I used it some mostly because I didn't know how to turn it off, and man did I wish that I did, because it was wrong so often. For the most part, it was recommending things that were correct, don't get me wrong, but these corrections would often change the entire meaning of what I wrote. I don't know if it's better nowadays. I hope that it's gained more skill in changing things to the same meaning as what you originally wrote. But the issue is that it's trained on us, and so it's giving us suggestions of things that are what people commonly write. That's really cool and helpful a lot of the times, right? But anytime that your natural writing voice deviates outside of the norm, you kind of get edited back into the most generic writing style, which is really not what you want in a book. One of the main things that grips readers in a novel is your individual writing voice. Now, I'm not entirely opposed to using AI as a tool in the editing process. Take this with a grain of salt. There are some things that AI could legitimately do that would make the process easier for editors and for writers alike. I don't know how effective AI is at doing these things right now, and you're gonna wanna hold this thought to come back to some caveats that I have in a second, but some ideas that jump off the top of my head are using AI to scan your work and select overused words or something like that. That's something that editors already review manually, or they write scripts to highlight words that are used very frequently in a short amount of time. You want to flag this sort of thing because you want an editor or the author to come back and look and be like, do we really need to say hit for every verb in this fight scene? That sort of thing could be marked potentially with AI. Now, the caveats I have for this is, first off, the environmental toll that AI has. If you can use a human who's just gonna drink 2 liters of water a day rather than dump out 1,000 liters of water into the desert, then obviously that makes a lot of sense, but it will be more expensive to you as a consumer. But beyond that, you don't really want to feed your work into AI. There's closed AI and there's open AI, and anything that you feed into open AI will become part of the AI's training, essentially. And so your individual work that you've spent your blood, sweat, and tears on is now part of its database. And so if someone else wants to read a romance about someone in the 80s, they might churn out your romance about someone in the 80s and plagiarize your work, essentially. On the other hand, you can pay to use a closed AI. And even then, I wouldn't personally trust AI with your unpublished work, or even your published work for that matter, simply because I don't know what the terms of these companies are. I haven't really spent that much time looking into closed AI models, and so I could be wrong, but I wouldn't necessarily trust my unpublished work with a computer system that could teach itself off of it and then regurgitate my work later, even if it says that it won't. I don't want to sound tinfoil hat wearing, but I just feel like this is uncharted waters. This is the wild, wild west, and so it's hard to know for sure where lines really will be drawn in a decade and where everything that the AI has learned off of you will end up. That aside, closed AI models cost a bit of money, and they cost on a subscription basis. And so if you're planning on using AI to help you edit your unpublished books, it might cost something similar to a new editor's work. Okay, all of that aside, pretend we're okay with using AI to edit your work. Even if you find it useful in some areas of editing, you really don't want to use AI as your primary editor, because a big part of what editors do is work with what you've written, work with your voice, and preserve it while making everything correct and easy to read. And AI is not very good at that. It's not very good at preserving your individual style, even if you ask it to learn your style and then base it off of that. It also isn't going to come up against something that it doesn't understand and then query you, ask you a question about it. It's going to make assumptions, which requires a lot of going back and checking on your side. Where an editor might run into something and be like, what exactly was this sentence meant to mean? And then they'll email you or leave a comment, and you can have a discussion and they can help you achieve that meaning. But back to the core of this argument, classism. If you can't afford an editor, as I know is a huge hurdle to writing. The great thing about the internet is it's a great forum for writers to come together, make friends, friends and help each other out in their work. This writer-to-writer feedback or beta reading group, those sorts of connections and the feedback that you get are great resources for early in the process editing, developmental editing, and often are free. Obviously, hiring someone will give you a better result than looking for free options, but I do think it's important to say that there are some free options for things like copy editing. Many editors, when they're just starting out, myself included back when I was starting out, work for their friends for free or for a discount to build up a portfolio and prove what they can do. I'm not advocating for only going to people for free labor, but I'm just saying that if you don't look for affordable options, you won't find them. And they do exist out there. A lot of times friends will edit for each other at a cheaper price, or you can find a younger editor that's at a cheaper price, and that will be more affordable than someone who's been editing for 50 years. There are options out there, and I just encourage you to explore the options if affordability is an issue that you're having with editing. That said, the best result that you're going to get when writing a book is hiring an editor that knows what they're doing. And so an experienced editor who costs a little bit more will give you a better result. And you kind of just can't fight that. It will give you a better result than a younger editor, than a friend who isn't a professional editor, and then AI, who also isn't a professional editor. But let's move on to NanoWrimo's second point, ableism. Not all brains have the same abilities, and not all writers function at the same level of education or proficiency in the language in which they are writing. Some brains and ability levels require outside help or accommodation to achieve certain goals. The notion that all writers should be able to perform certain functions. What is going on with their... Look at this. This paragraph needed an editor. Look at this. The curly quotes are curling the wrong way. The quotes that you use in writing are the curly form. Usually it'll autocorrect on Word or, Google Docs, and they're meant to curl toward the word, but one of them is curling away from this. And then later in the same paragraph, they just use straight quotes, which are like for inches and stuff. I'm sorry, that distracted me. The notion that all writers should be able to perform certain functions independently or is a position that we disagree with wholeheartedly. That or should have been removed. They could have used an editor, even though it costs a little bit of money. The notion that all writers should be able to perform certain functions independently is a position that we disagree with wholeheartedly. There's a wealth of reasons why individuals can't see the issues in their writing without help. That's true, and is the case for this writer. They clearly couldn't see some of the issues with this paragraph without help. Okay, but to the core of what they wrote, my main reaction was, wow. Just wow. Imagine being told that your mental illness or disability means that you just can't write and AI will have to do it for you. Actually, you don't have to imagine, because here's what a couple of disabled people who read this statement had to say about it. Reddit user Lady Elfried said, "Bruh, I'm disabled to the fucking max. My brain and arms don't work for writing. I'm still pursuing writing and I'm not using AI. I'm a minority and AI would hinder, not help my case, further putting me in the trenches." This statement was such a cop-out to be lazy. A craft just takes time. It's not classist to take a little more time to fix a draft. Everyone has access to knowledge how to do something properly. I'm still going to attempt my 50K, but never under the Nano name. What a shame. Another Reddit user, Kaija Rain, says, "As a disabled poor writer who has definitely had my work stolen already, F this shit. F them, and F the AI sponsor they wrote in on. I haven't been involved since they treated me badly as an ML. I'm not sure what that means. I'm now deleting my account. I trained myself to write well. I don't need AI. And anyone promising success in publishing is a huge red flag, especially when publishers and agents are rather against AI. Also, just who do they think can afford to buy these AI programs? It certainly isn't disabled and poor writers. Talk about elitist and classist behavior. Nano just gave an excellent example. I really love what that Reddit user said about these programs costing money. I think that's something that people often overlook when trying to use classism or ableism as an argument for AI. In an article they wrote on the subject called "Dear NanoWrimo, Don't Pretend That You Care About Disabled Authors Now," Dal Cisuruno said this: "I'm an indie sci-fi author, blind with chronic depression and other disabilities. Some still undiagnosed, so I can't categorize them yet. I'm from what people in North America now refer to as the Global South. It used to be called the Third World, then developing countries, whatever. I think I'm more than qualified to drag that NanoWrimo statement through the mud as much as I please. That statement, the hideous hypocrisy, and the get-rich-quick scheme of AI writing books for you. I'm utterly disinterested in dragging individual humans. Has AI ever helped me in my free testings? Yeah, a bit. Assistive AI like screen readers and even image description tools help me in the more visual aspects of my process. Can I use what machines have provided as my own written work to sell? Absolutely not. To insinuate that disabled artists are the ones looking into that scam and that we couldn't possibly improve our craft via reading and practicing our skills, that is the true ableism in this whole discussion. Dal Ciso said that better than I ever could. The fact of the matter is, disabled people can write, and to insinuate otherwise is the true ableism. You might be surprised to find that some of the greatest writers in history were also disabled. In a video about this very situation, Thoughts Couture came up with this list of famous disabled writers, though they are far from the only ones. Marjorie Kempt, who wrote the first English autobiography titled The Book of Marjorie Kempt, was believed to have postpartum psychosis that caused visions that she wrote about throughout her life. John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, among other things, and inspired so much of English writing and thought, went blind slowly throughout his life, and toward the end of his life employed aides to help him in his craft. Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrote Crime and Punishment, among many other things, he had epilepsy and experienced frequent seizures that affected his mental state. Flannery O'Connor, author of Good Country People, had lupus, a disease that slowly deteriorates your body, and beyond that, the medicine that she took for it left her ill often as well. But because of her experience, she often featured disabilities and physical ailments in her books and poems. Christy Brown, who wrote an autobiography called My Left Foot, as well as other books and poems, had cerebral palsy and learned to write with his left foot, the limb he had most control over. Aside from writing many moving novels and poems, he was also a painter. Nancy Meyers, author of On Being a Cripple, had MS and used a wheelchair for most of her life. Octavia E. Butler, who wrote The Parable of the Sower and Kindred and many more books, had dyslexia and as a kid really struggled in school. Despite this, she went on to write dozens of science fiction novels, many of which went on to win awards. Judith Heumann, author of Rolling Warrior, the incredible, sometimes awkward, true story of a rebel girl on wheels who helped spark a revolution, and several other books, contracted polio at a young age and used a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Thank you to Thoughts Couture for taking the time to compile such a list. Other authors that I would want to add to this are Sylvia Plath, who wrote The Bell Jar. She had very severe depression. Stephen Hawking, who wrote A Brief History of Time, and famously had ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Frida Kahlo suffered from polio as a child, and then later as an adult was in a severe bus accident that left most of the bones of her torso broken and left her in extreme chronic pain for the rest of her life. But she kept painting and wrote so much poetry, as well as an autobiography, The Diary of Frida Kahlo, an intimate self-portrait. Okay, I'll stop, but you get the picture. Some of the best writing we have comes from disabled people. So to say that a disabled person needs AI to help them write is beyond insulting. NanoWrimo's last point is a general access issue. All of these considerations exist within a larger system in which writers don't always have equal access to resources along the chain. For example, underrepresented minorities are less likely to be offered traditional publishing contracts, which place some by default into the indie author space, which inadequately creates upfront cost burdens that authors who do not suffer from systemic discrimination may not have to incur. Sadly, this is a great point, but AI is not the way to address it. First off, traditional publishing frowns on AI at least as much as I do, and so telling people to craft their book through AI is not going to help them get those traditional publishing gigs. My other concern with this statement, though, has to do with generative AI's effects on the indie publishing sphere, but we'll get into that in the next section. The overwhelming feeling that I feel when reading this, besides pure rage, is just that this isn't the answer to all of these problems. NanoWrimo addresses people who have less time and money for writing, less mental space, mental capacity for writing, and they see their desire to write and respond with, okay, but have something else write for you, which is not addressing the problem at all. Imagine I wanted to write a book. We'll use the prompt I came up with just a second ago about two best friends who fall in love and it's the 80s, okay? That's the setting, those are the people. If I really wanted to write that story, then I would go and write it. I know that the novelty of AI really hits that dopamine rush, and it feels like when you type something into it and then something comes out like what you were thinking about, it feels like you've created that. The dopamine is there to say, look, you did a thing. But having AI write my 80s romance would be like telling this great idea to a friend, only to have that friend show up at my house later having written my ideas into their book. But actually worse than that, because they would be stealing my ideas and writing them into a book, while also plagiarizing the writing voice of Emily Henry, and then taking a dozen gallons of drinking water and pouring them out into the desert in the middle of a drought. I know I'm coming off really strong, but it's because I have really strong opinions on the matter. And the beauty of the art that we create, yes, including writing, is the soul and the feelings and the love that we pour into it as we create it. And that's something that AI can never replace. Luckily, the reaction to NanoWrimo's statement was less than favorable.
Shit, no, man. I believe you get your ass kicked saying something like that, man.
Predictably, they got totally and utterly canceled over it. Whatever canceled even means. If it means that the majority of writers and readers, their audience, now think they're slimeballs and want nothing to do with them, then yes, they are canceled. But NanoWrimo and their statement from last September isn't the only force pushing AI into the publishing industry, particularly the indie publishing industry. Unfortunately, places like Kindle Unlimited, where indie authors go to publish their works, have recently been flooded with books written by AI. There's an example that I think most of us have seen circling the interwebs, but it's this book called Dark Hollow Year 2 by Lena McDonald. In the middle of one of her chapters, she left in the response from her chatbot after running something through it. I've rewritten the passage to align more with Jay Bree's style, which features more tension, gritty undertones, and raw emotional subtext beneath these supernatural elements. So it's happening. And what do we as readers do about it? Readers who want to read books written by real people who have real emotions to pour into their works. A lot of what we do is try and suss out if a book was written by AI. Just like when teaching people how to spot AI images, we make listicles of things to look out for. But in this case, weird looking hands and an inability to eat spaghetti won't work. A list I saw, though I won't out the person who made it because I know that they were well-meaning, went something like this. The timing of publication between books. Typically this takes 1 to 2 years, so if it's 2 to 3 months, it might be AI. Poor balance between style and substance. AI writing either sounds like an informal textbook or waxes so poetic you can't follow the plot. Pay attention to how the writing uses nouns and adjectives, like walls that echo with the secrets of the universe. AI is redundant in its prose, often using the same line multiple times on the same page. AI violates the rule of show don't tell. Conflicting adjectives like someone's eyes expressing excitement and fatigue. A lack of dialogue. A corporate sounding synopsis, read like a bullet checklist. This person explained it as, if you like this, this, and this, then you'll like this book. Character names like Alara and Kale. Over-reliance on modifiers. Overuse of M-dashes. Honestly, if a book is doing all of these things, it might be AI. But let's take a closer look at that list. Do any of these items look familiar to you? Like, I don't know, errors that a new author might make? Let's go through some of them. The timing of publication between books. This can be an issue because, yes, sometimes people will publish books back to back to back to back because they've been using AI to get their books out sooner. That's possible. But also, some authors write an entire series and then rapid fire release them a couple of months at a time. Other authors just push things out really fast and publish something every 3 to 5 months or faster. The creator of this list did recognize that some people do write that fast, so they recommended looking back at authors' catalogs and seeing if they were publishing this fast before 2022 when access to general AI became prevalent. But again, as is the issue with AI art, this kind of cuts out newer authors. If you've been writing more recently than that and just happen to write really fast and not spend as much time going back through and editing your work, then people might perceive you as AI. The next point, poor balance between style and substance, either sounding like a textbook or being overly purple in your prose. This one is especially frustrating to me because this is something that authors struggle with all the time, especially early on in their career. And in the indie publishing world, we see a lot of people publishing earlier on in their career than we would see in the trad publishing world. And so we do see a lot of people struggling to either explain things in an interesting way and sounding a little bit more robotic, or people just going super into the explanations and just really describing that color on the wall. And you're like, okay, that's not very helpful. We can move on now. But they're learning and they're trying. So does AI do that? Yes, but so do people. The next one is pay attention to how they use nouns and adjectives, like the walls echo with the secrets of the universe. And I find this one to be a pretty good one and kind of hilarious, because AI really does struggle with this, and it's something that might genuinely tip you off if something is AI. But it's also something that writers do, new writers and old writers alike. This is, in fact, actually one of my personal gripes. I've brought it up in a book review before, where people will often mix their metaphors. And I don't mean mixing two metaphors together, but they will be half metaphorical and half very physical in their descriptions. I've used a Taylor Swift lyric to describe this idea before. He had a one-hand reel on the steering wheel and the other on my heart. That sounds like something that AI would write. But it's just one of those things where people kind of struggle with mixing figurative and literal language, and so obviously so does AI. So it is not a perfect way to detect this. So if you're using this as a method to detect AI, you're going to come up with a lot of false positives. All right, then AI being redundant in its prose, using the same line on the same page, etc. This one is an especially rough one, because I hate to break it to you, AI does this, but so do so many authors, like big ones, traditionally published authors that you know and love. For example, Reads with Rachel in her review of Onyx Storm did this thing where she broke down every sex scene that Rebecca Yarros wrote in the Fourth Wing series and showed how each one was written basically beat for beat, line for line the same throughout all three of the books. The description was basically the same. Pause. I'm afraid what you just heard me say is that Rebecca Yarros used the same description multiple times, and so she's using AI to write. I am not. This is not me accusing Rebecca Yarros of using AI. This is me explaining that real human authors repeat the same words and phrasing over and over again in their books, on accident and on purpose. Are you with me? Okay, other authors that I've caught reusing the same phrasing a lot throughout their books. One example that comes to mind is Robert Jordan. He doesn't do it so much so on the same page, but he often uses the same description of something in the exact same words later, like she folded her arms beneath her breasts. Which, what is that? Where else are you gonna fold them? But he describes it in the same exact words every time. As far as using the same phrases in really close proximity, authors that come to mind are Ali Hazelwood, Carolyn Sparks, and I'm sure a dozen more if I were thinking about it more closely. The whole point of having editors is to eliminate quirks of the writing that make it a clunky reading experience. But inevitably things always eke through, especially in books that receive less vigorous edits, as is often the case in the indie publishing world. So yes, you will find real, genuine authors, good authors even, who use the same description within a couple of pages. This happens all of the time. If you start to look out for it, you'll start to see it and it will bother you just like it bothers me. Okay, let's start going through these a little bit faster. AI violates the rules of show don't tell. Again, so do so many authors. Conflicting adjectives, like someone's eyes expressing excitement and fatigue. Except that description isn't impossible. In fact, it's kind of an interesting idea to think about. I can think of 2 to 3 different situations where someone's eyes might express both excitement and fatigue at the same time. A lack of dialogue? Yeah, that happens with authors, it happens with AI. A corporate sounding synopsis, read like a bullet checklist. Again, a lot of indie authors don't have the skills for writing every little thing. In the trad publishing world, someone would be writing that for you. But also that's just a trend in synopses lately where they kind of say, if you like this and this and this, then you'll like this. That's just happening right now. Character names like Alara and Kale. AI is learning from real books. Maybe those are popular names in the indie publishing, but maybe they're a sign of AI. It's hard to say. Over-reliance on modifiers. Again, it's hard to say if that's someone who is less experienced with writing or if it's AI. Overuse of M dashes. Ooh, okay. M dashes are just a part of grammar, okay? This misconception that AI is the one using those long dashes, M dashes, drives me up the wall. The script that I'm reading from right now is filled with so many M dashes because they're a part of grammar. They're a typical part of punctuation. But I can guarantee you, I can pull any book off this shelf and find M dashes right freaking there, right there. They're in every single printed book. So if you try and say that if a book has an M dash in it, it's written with AI, I will not threaten you, but I maybe will haunt your dreams. Maybe. Maybe.
Okay.
Are you kidding? That's unfair. She made those. I need to calm down. Everything's fine.
Amanda.
I'm an adult.
This one really gets me worked up. But so help me, if this misconception that AI created this dash, the M dash, my beloved dash, leads to it basically getting written out of grammar, my heart might get written out of existence with it. Unfortunately, as author D. Garcia puts it, ChatGPT and all these generative AI programs produce the M dash and the Oxford comma because it's been trained on our writing by real human created work. We didn't ask for this or approve it. Generative AI is harmful and I detest it, but let's stop leveling everything as AI when it's not. This mentality is hurting so many authors who have done nothing wrong. Educate yourselves before condemning a whole community. If you don't know that much about M dashes outside of the fact that people think it's connected to AI, I'm not going to take the time to get into a grammar lesson about what the M dash is, its function, how it erroneously got connected to AI, but if you're interested in the subject, I will link a video by Thoughts Couture on the subject. She did a really thorough video on it that I stumbled onto while I was preparing for this video, so I would definitely recommend checking out her video. Basically what we're running into is well-meaning readers like myself would rather read books written by real authors. And so we look for tells that tell us whether a book was written by an author or by AI. And unfortunately, that leads to so many false positives that in many cases get authors labeled as users of AI instead of genuine authors. And that very negatively impacts their career. One such tell, as one might say, that has been on a lot of people's minds lately is the use of a software called Vellum. It's a heavy lifting software like Adobe InDesign that you can use to format your draft into a physical print book or an ebook. But it's preferred by many self-published authors over InDesign because instead of a subscription fee, it has a one-time reasonable downloading fee. However, when one designs a book using Vellum software, it by default includes a note at the bottom of the copyright page that says created with Vellum. It isn't required to use that note to use the software, but you have to figure out where to go in the settings to turn that note off. Unfortunately, Vellum AI is now the name of an AI platform. It's actually a code development AI and has nothing to do with books, novels, book design, or anything on that subject. But that hasn't stopped overeager sleuths from accusing books with created with Vellum on the copyright page of using generative AI to write their novels. The ironic part of this to me is that the authors who take the time and money to download a software to create and design their book well are the least likely, in my opinion, to be using AI, because I feel like the people who cut corners on their writing, like using AI to write, are more likely to cut corners in the production of their ebooks, like just downloading a PDF and using that as an ebook instead of going to the work to make an EPUB file. That's just my opinion though. Vellum, the book designing platform, has actually responded to all of this by changing the text that they include there. That's right, a book designing software has had to change the way that they do things in response. There has been that many people accusing people who've designed their books with a certain software of using AI. It's that big of a problem. Coming later this week, we'll be revising Created with Vellum to read Designed with Vellum. While we've used Created with Vellum for over 12 years, we understand that it can be read differently today, especially in light of fears about AI. We hope that with this change, readers better understand how you've used Vellum. Note, this change will be in wording only, so if you've already turned this option off, you won't have to turn it off again. This is obviously no real atrocity that a software company had to make an update, but it's kind of ridiculous that they had to do this, don't you think? But, you know, good on them for responding and trying to protect authors. But what we are seeing here is a real author witch hunt on our hands. I'm not really on Threads. I try to be, but the bookish Threads sphere is a scary place to me. So I'm relying on threads that Kate Align Digital found and referenced in some of her videos, but in these threads, apparently readers are demanding that authors prove that they didn't use AI in their work, a virtually impossible task. Stabby Lottie said, "You want video footage of authors writing their books to prove they wrote it? I'm gonna need video footage of you buying all your books, otherwise it might be piracy. Please let common sense come back into the chat." And then a few authors responded with, "It didn't work when artists posted these videos. They were accused of faking those videos." That's true, and AI has now learned to create in-process videos of creating art. So who's to say you couldn't make a video of someone writing a book as well? As much as we want there to be an easy and reliable way to discover if a piece of work was written by AI or a real person, there isn't. Some have suggested AI detectors as a possible solution. But not only are you feeding someone's work into AI against their will, but also they frequently come back with false positives. Something that even AI agrees with. When I typed this into Google, the AI overview response that I didn't ask for popped up and said, AI detectors are not consistently reliable and should not be solely relied upon to determine if content is AI generated. So no, that's not a great solution either. Where we're at right now is authors who use a very commonly used design software to create their books that happens to share a name with an AI program are being accused of using AI. Authors who use a super common, in my opinion, lovely punctuation mark, the M dash, are accused of using AI. Newer authors who make common writing pitfalls are accused of using AI. And unfortunately, as is often the case, people remember the accusation and not the rebuttal. So these kinds of accusations can seriously and permanently damage an author's career, especially lesser-known authors. It sucks because so many of us readers want to know if a book was written by a person or AI, so we can support real authors. But in a witch hunt, everybody burns. The AI witch hunt at its core is filled with people who are very well-meaning. We want to find real authors so that we can ensure that our money goes to supporting real authors who personally, lovingly, and painstakingly craft their work. It's a desire to protect authors and to prevent human authors, especially new and undiscovered authors, from getting buried under a pile of AI dribble, a pile that AI can keep producing faster than we have any ability to clear. The deeply ironic truth, however, is that the hunt against AI creates impossible barriers that real human authors have to measure up against. And the more barriers we set up in an already underpaid profession like writing, the fewer people will write books, which is the very outcome we're trying to avoid by seeking to prevent AI from taking over the book market. With this in mind, I try really hard not to jump to conclusions like assuming a book was written with AI if it doesn't say that it was written with AI. But I'm not perfect. For example, if I see that an author used AI to make their cover art or promotional art, I struggle to not automatically assume that they think things made with AI is the same as making it themselves. But that's not necessarily true, and so I have no right to assume that they used AI to write their book. And at the same time, if you think it's appropriate to license art under your own name that was mined off of other people's work, it's hard to think that that person wouldn't feel the same way about the written word. I just really wish we lived in a world where people would say if they made something with AI, so we could trust when people say they didn't make something with AI. But you can't legislate morality, so people will lie about things that they think they'll get in trouble for. One side note before we wrap up, I know that there's been a lot of drama on Book Talk recently about character AI sponsorships. A keen observer might find it odd that I haven't talked about this in an entire video about AI in the book world, but it really just comes down to the fact that I don't see that as important of an issue. Like, I disagree with character AI. I think it's a bad software. I have the same issues with it that I have with other generative AI, except that character AI adds in copyright infringement and intellectual right infringement, so it's worse. But that's really all I have to say about it. How do we use and approach AI in the correct way? The short answer is I don't know. It's tricky. A lot of us really want the answer to be just get rid of generative AI, but that's not realistic. Unfortunately, generative AI and all other forms of AI are here to stay. This is the future.
Future's now, old man.
We're just gonna have to deal with it. Like I mentioned earlier, some people have suggested using AI detectors, but they come up with false positives and kill the planet at the same time, and you're feeding someone's work into it, so that's really not the solution, in my opinion. Personally, I really hope for some top-down regulations that would legislate the disclosure of use of AI, be it fully written with AI, only refined by AI, or the use of AI images for inspiration. With that kind of regulation, we could go back to trusting that when people say they wrote something themselves, they really wrote it all by themselves. Or at least if they're not trustworthy, there'll be some real repercussions. But that's more of a government issue. What about what we the people can do? Is using AI okay in the creative process? Again, I don't really have an answer for you. I know that's not a great response, but that's where we're at. I know it's bad to kill our planet, but if we were powering AI off of cleaner energy, like nuclear, or somehow found a way to cool these data centers, like in the bottom of the ocean or something, I don't know. Does that make it okay? I mean, generative AI is still cannibalizing other people's work, cutting it up and gluing it back together to create a product. I personally really don't see a way that using generative AI and then calling its work the work of your own hands and mind will ever really be ethical. And if you're just trying to generate images to inspire you while you write, I don't know, maybe, but also like the internet and Pinterest exist. Aside from generative AI, other forms of AI like assistive AI are a safer bet. Do I personally think that AI could do as good of a job editing your work as a real human editor could? No, but could it maybe help you? Maybe. It depends on what you're hoping to get out of it. But remember, feeding your work into AI means that it can use your work to create someone else's work. So I just don't suggest putting your unpublished work into AI. But if you do end up personally deciding to use AI in your creative process, be it writing, editing, creating visual art, or anything else, please, for the love of all things holy, be honest and transparent about it. Those are my thoughts on AI in the creative industry, particularly in the book world. I clearly have a lot to say on the issue. It is a really complicated issue. If you agree with me, that's great. If you disagree with me, that's great. Let me know in the comments. We can have a discussion about it. This is a new part of the world. It's a new technology that we're all becoming familiar with, and legislature is far from catching up, as is industry protocol. So it would be naive to think that this isn't a discussion we'll be having for months and years to come. That said, starting the discussion now, even though we don't have legislature around the use of AI, we don't have good industry protocol, that's just it, we don't. And so discussing it now and getting the wheels turning on how to ethically and responsibly use AI, that's what we've got to start doing, right? We've got to start having that discussion now. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you liked it, and feel free to subscribe to my channel. I talk about all things bookish here. I don't typically wax poetic about the use of AI. I'm often giving book reviews about things like The Wheel of Time. Be sure to check out that playlist. Or I'm going book shopping or rearranging my bookshelves or talking about whatever catches my fancy. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely stick around and check out some of my other videos. Also, feel free to follow me on my Goodreads, Storygraph, Instagram, TikTok, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight. Except for TikTok. It's like Emily_at midnight or something. I don't know, someone had my tag. But with that, all I have left to say is have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book.